Should the Titans re-sign Derrick Henry and or Denico Autry? That is the main topic we are going to dive into today. This is the Music City Audible. Let's get to it. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Music City Audible podcast presented by Broadway Sports Media in partnership with 440 Sports. I'm Justin Graver. With me as always is Justin Melo. Justin, how's it going?
Doing well, man. Excited to talk about what I think is obviously the two premier free agents that the Tennessee Titans have in Derrick Henry and Denico Autry, and also quickly touch on a couple of new staffing hires that we didn't get to, or they hadn't made yet the last time we recorded. So clean up some of that stuff as well.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to get into whether or not the Titans should re-sign their two biggest name free agents, the two most impactful players that are becoming free agents over the last handful of years, with maybe the exception of Ryan Tannehill, who the Titans will definitely not be re-signing. So we're going to look at, contract value. Is it worth it for the Titans based on these players are getting up there in age? So we're going to look at the timeline compared to the rest of the Titans roster and decide, as if we were the GMs, what kind of offers we would make to these players to return to Tennessee, and then the ball's in their court. But yes, as you mentioned, before we get there, the Titans have hired a special teams coordinator finally. They hired a couple more assistant coaches we can talk through. Before we get into any of that, I want to remind everyone to subscribe to the YouTube channel, the Music City Audible podcast. We really appreciate everyone listening to the pod, but we appreciate it more if you're watching. Really helps us grow if you check us out on YouTube. And the best way to help us grow is to leave a comment. Any comment below. The more comments we get, the more YouTube puts our video in front of other people's eyeballs. Tell your friends and comment below. Should the Titans re-sign Henry and Autry? Let us know. All right, Justin, let's get into this. The Titans have hired Colt Anderson as their special teams coordinator. The most famous thing that Colt Anderson is known for is probably being the guy who the ball was snapped to on that Indianapolis Colts horrific fourth down fake punt, the weirdest special teams play we've maybe ever seen. Colt Anderson was on the field for that. So right off the bat, as a special teams coordinator, he knows what not to do, right?
Yeah, hopefully we'll never see that one again, right? He'll know what playbook it was in, and he's burned it.
Yeah.
It's an interesting hire, right? I'm not going to lie to you. It took a long time for him to hire someone that he already knew. They worked together last year in Cincinnati. I believe he was the assistant special teams coach, right, for the Bengals last year. So I don't think, I don't think any Titans fans should probably have a ton of confidence in the special teams coordinator hiring process, right? They interviewed a guy who everyone's like, oh my God, please no. And then he took another job, and then some more time went by, and we landed on this hire, first time special teams coordinator, inexperienced, a guy he already knew. It just makes me wonder why it took this long, if this was always the route that was planned. And it kind of tells me it probably wasn't the route that was planned, and you sort of had to pivot. And, maybe they didn't have as many good connections to potential special teams coordinators, and it took a little longer to develop. So I think it's fair, to sort of question that process. I think, fun fact, by the way, I found this, I love stuff like this. He was a college teammate of Mark Mariani's.
Oh, wow.
Titans legendary returner. Mark, you didn't know that? I could tell by the way you reacted. Mark Mariani. They played together at Montana when the Titans drafted Mark in like the 7th round of whatever, or late 2000s, right? 2009-ish, I think. So pretty funny that they maybe Mariani could come here and teach a returner a thing or two. Still one of the best returners Titans have ever had. I don't care what anyone says. They haven't had a lot of great ones.
2010
the Titans era.
7th round pick, 2010, Mark Mariani.
2010, perfect. I was pretty close there. Maybe there's a job for Mark waiting here as the as assistant special teams guy, but no, definitely. I think those are my thoughts on Colt. I'll be in wait and see mode, see how their special teams looks.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look across the board at the 3 coordinator positions now that all 3 spots have been filled, and including Brian Callahan himself as sort of a 4th coordinator in this equation. None of them have coordinating experience. I mean, official coordinating experience as the guy heading up their unit. So it'll be interesting to track. You'd love to think that all 3 guys are going to be home runs because that's the way a biased fan wants to think. Odds are maybe one of them is a dud. And if I had to put my money on who it was, I'd probably put it on Colt Anderson just because I have a lot of faith in Denard Wilson. And if we're talking about offensive coordinator, sure, Nick Holtz is that in title, but really Brian Callahan's going to be in charge of the offense, and I have a ton of confidence in him. So just playing a numbers game here, There's a chance Colt Anderson is not good, but we will see. I'm not going to judge. I don't think, Craig Aukerman certainly didn't, set the bar very high.
Very high, yeah.
For what we're looking for in a special teams coordinator in Tennessee. So anyway, we'll see. There are two other assistant coaches we'll briefly mention here. Titans hired Scott Fuchs as the assistant offensive line coach and Steve Donatel as a defensive assistant. Scott Fuchs comes over from Kansas. He has a very, he's very well spoken of by people in the know. So seems like a pretty good hire. Yeah.
31 years college coaching experience. Kind of crazy he's never made the jump or even had a stint in the pros, right? And by the way, is it really pronounced Fuchs? Are we going to do that? Is that what it is? Okay, fine. We'll play along. It's pronounced
spelled
Fuchs.
Fuchs. It could be Futchs.
It could be. Yeah, it could be.
It could be another word that starts with F. No, I think
could
it's
be another.
Fuchs.
We'll go with Fuchs. 31 years coaching experience, as I said, has coached a couple of good NFL offensive linemen in the college, all mainly low-level programs, to be honest. I think Kansas most recently is probably the biggest job he's had, but he coached Billy Turner, once, I believe, third-round pick of the Dolphins. He coached, and God, I'm not going to pretend I know how to pronounce the last name. Is it Chase Roulier, the center for the Washington Commanders that was there? Totally. For a little while. So he's coached a couple NFLers, and 31 years, man, finally making the jump to the pros makes you wonder. And I've heard from a lot of college coaches, and I hate to speculate because I haven't heard from Coach Fuchs, but a lot of coaches getting fed up with the setup and infrastructure of college ball right now, with how NIL has impacted it. And, when you're an older guy and now you got to switch up the way you've recruited for the last 30 years, essentially. And I saw a stat. I wish I had it in front of me. This NFL Combine coming up next week, which we'll talk about, of course, when the time comes. But fewest small schoolers in a very long time. That's a direct result of the impact NIL has had on the transfer portal. Mm-hmm. I'm interviewing kids right now. I feel like every single one transferred at some point. I'm noticing that more and more as I go through my interview series. So a lot of guys fed up with that, infrastructure, trying to jump over to the pros, and Coach Fuchs finally takes the plunge after 31 years at that level. And Donatel, coach of Ed Donatel, right? The son of Ed Donatel, I should say. Longtime NFL defensive coordinator, getting an opportunity here. I think a very interesting role for him as a defensive assistant.
Yeah, so he's going to be, defensive assistant. We don't really know what that exactly means. Probably watching a lot of tape.
His father's great defensive mind his dad has. So that no doubt. I'm sure it's a good addition.
Putting cut-ups together and things like that. So he'll have his hands full on the defensive side. So that covers the news. Let's get into the meat of this conversation of today's show here. Starting with the big king himself, the big dog, the King Henry. Derrick Henry just turned 30 years old in a month or so ago. A couple of months, whatever, early January. Turned 30 years old. He's hitting the free agent market for the first time really in his career, because every other chance he's had to hit free agency, the Titans have come up with a contract
only one
extension.
Other chance.
Well, they had one chance to hit free agency, and then they extended him midway through the second contract for a third contract.
Oh, yes, right.
He never really got to the market in either instance. But and he has been on Bussin' with the Boys this offseason, talking about his free agency. If you remember the last game of the season, he sort of gave his send-off to Titans fans. He went out into the middle of the field with a microphone and thanked everyone for his time in Nashville.
Don't see that every day.
And then on Bussin' with the Boys, he went on to say that he's never explored free agency. He's kind of looking forward to being courted by teams. He talked about how his time in Nashville, just like looking back on it, talked about it as if it would be over. And then,
honestly talked about how it was less fun. This
past season, for sure. But
less recognizable faces and
right, and maybe that contributes to him wanting to leave. And we speculated on this podcast for throughout the second half of the season on if this was Henry's last year in Tennessee. And I kept saying, if Mike Vrabel's back as the head coach, there's a decent chance the Titans try really hard to bring Derrick Henry back. If Mike Vrabel's gone, who knows what's going to happen? Well, obviously they've made the coaching change. Brian Callahan, as we've talked about on this show, went on the radio in Nashville and said things like, Derrick Henry would fit well in any offense. We'd love to have a player like Derrick back. It's not just what he does on the field. It's his leadership in the huddle, on the practice field, in the locker room. So obviously Brian Callahan is making it known publicly that if it was up to him, and if, contracts weren't any kind of option here, he would have Henry back on this roster. If Henry was under contract next year, I don't think there would be a risk of the Titans cutting him. There has to be mutual interest, obviously. On the last contract Henry signed, they added those void years to the end of it, if you remember, to lower the cap hit. And the result of that is that he now carries a $4.7 million dead cap hit for the 2024 season. No matter what roster he's on, whether the Titans bring him back and rework his deal or whatever, doesn't matter. Those void years have gone into effect now as of earlier this week. So Henry will have that cap hit, dead cap hit, regardless of whether the Titans re-sign him. It doesn't really matter, in my opinion, when you're talking about what kind of contract you give to Derrick Henry. You're not like, oh, we would have paid him this much, but because of $4.7 million dead cap, we can only offer him X amount. Because if you sign any running back, or you don't sign it, you're paying this money no matter what. It's lost money. It's gone. It's not. It shouldn't factor into any decision making in the future. It's in the past, even though it will affect them this year. So the big question is, would there be mutual interest? Would Henry want to come play for Brian Callahan? Was Brian Callahan just being nice and respectful and saying the things he's supposed to say publicly about a franchise legend? Does he actually feel like Derrick Henry would be a good fit in the offense he wants to run in Tennessee? That's going to be probably less reliant on early down runs and play action and more reliant on a pass game that attacks the defense with answers to any coverage they throw at them, right? That's what he's talked about as his philosophy on offense. So I'll turn it over to you now, Justin. Before I do, I'll just say Spotrac is projecting Derrick Henry to sign a 1-year, $10.3 million contract. That's what they have as his market value. 1 year, $10.3 million. Obviously, age is a huge consideration in that contract. That's why it's only a 1-year deal. But he's still been a very productive runner. I mean, the yards before contact, if you look at his average yards before contact, they've gone down each of the last 3 years, which is an indication that he's not getting room. The offensive line is not providing him room to run before contact. So you bring in Bill Callahan, you revamp the offensive line. Would Henry be more productive in next year's version of the Titans offense than he was last year? Would he be more efficient? These are all the questions you have to weigh. So Justin, what do you think, bottom line, ultimately, if you were running the Titans, what kind of contract would you offer Derrick Henry, and do you think that he comes back?
Well, I have so many thoughts, and it's tough to sort through all of them, in all honesty. I mean, number one, let me run through a couple of things here. I thought what Callahan said on the radio, you might be able to qualify it as coach speak, but I also thought it was truthful, right? Like, I think there's probably a problem with your offense if you don't think Derrick Henry can fit it in some manner, right? Like, it doesn't mean that you got to run the Mike Vrabel offense and it's first down runs and second down runs every single time. Like, Derrick Henry's an effective running back, right? No matter if you're a pass happy offense or not, you'd like to think he's going to maximize the carries that he gets. And as he gets older, that might be the best way to manage his effectiveness, right? To have a pass happy offense and not run him into a brick wall, so to speak, down after down. I thought he was still fairly effective this year, almost 1,200 yards. He scored 12 touchdowns, 4.2 yards per carry. That's, it's pretty much been the same 3 years in a row, right? 4.3, 4.4, 4.2. Yeah. So I think he's relatively maintained, his average yards per carry output these last 3 seasons. He's still one of the best touchdown scorers in the league. At his position. I mean, he scored double-digit touchdowns, 6 years in a row now, something ridiculous. And that part of his game hasn't, tailed off at all. You talked about the yards before contact. Titans haven't had a good offensive line since 2021, right? That's really the last time they had a good unit. That's still, I believe Lewan was healthy that year. He was. Roger Saffold was still the left guard. Ben Jones, the center. And unfortunately, that was the year he had almost 1,000 yards in 8 games, right? And then he broke his foot or whatever in that 8th game and didn't play in the regular season again. So, contract-wise, honestly, I have a hard time figuring out what it's going to be. I think the Spotrac projection's a little on the high end, right? Like, yeah, maybe if he signs a 1-year deal, maybe that's what he's asking for. I would like to think if you're the Titans or someone else, and maybe you're weary of getting into that second year, but if you do a 2-year contract, I think maybe, $7.5, $8 million per, you can avoid that $10 million threshold. I don't think he's getting $4 or $5 million a year, right? I know running back's a non-premium position, he's an older guy.
The only pushback I'll put on that is the class is
it's a good
the
class.
free agent class is crazy top heavy with names.
Barkley, Josh Jacobs,
Austin Eckler. There's a ton
Tony
of guys.
Pollard, although I think Pollard was so disappointing this past year.
He was, but there's also reports that he was injured he was playing hurt until like week 11, and he finally started feeling like himself. But
he had the season-ending injury the year before, so
the numbers don't really bear out. The numbers don't really bear out that Pollard got any better after week 11. Maybe the touchdowns increased, so the fantasy points increased.
He's not a workhorse. I'm sorry, everyone was so excited to see him without Zeke, and I think he kind of showed probably better in a duo.
But the point is, there's a lot of running backs on the market. Many of them younger. I mean, most of them are younger than Derrick Henry. Have more tread left on the tires. Have I mean, keep in mind, Henry's led the league in carries if you combine the last 5 years together, and he missed half of a season during that time. So. There are good, some of the mid-tier ones that are going to be cheaper. I've talked a lot about Gus Edwards on this show. I think would be an intriguing target if they don't bring Henry back. Devin Singletary and Zach Moss are two guys I was not high on at all that had really good years. Yeah. They're going to try to cash in, but you're still not commanding a whole lot of money as those guys. So you're right, though. It's not a very good draft class, right? So that'll probably make teams be maybe a bit more aggressive than they normally would. But you're right. I mean, the way teams have treated running backs lately, as good as the class is, you'd have to think there's a good chance it just drives the price in the market way down, right? Exactly. Like, I feel like these guys are going to be, when free agency officially starts on the 13th of March.
There'll be a dime a dozen of them.
When the tampering window opens on March 11th, I'm not expecting a bunch of contract news involving running backs. Agreed. I'm expecting these to be like wave 2, wave 3 signings where it's like, the guys on the market realize they're not going to get the offer that they hoped they might get because nobody's competing for their services because there's so many guys available, and most NFL teams unfortunately view the running back as a more or less interchangeable position. So they're not going to say, oh, we need to pay up for Henry when we can pay less for a Zach Moss who does a similar role, or AJ Dillon who can, carry a similar role in the offense. Maybe not quite as good, but maybe quite as good as an age 30 version of Derrick Henry. We're not talking about 26, 27, 28-year-old Henry.
And I know it's not really fair to say this, but he'll turn 31 during the 2024 season in week 18, granted, right at the end of it. But he will turn 31 while the 2024 season is still ongoing.
Yeah, so this is all to be weighed, and that's why I think you're right that the $10 million projection from Spotrac is high. I could see a world where a team that isn't the Titans offers him 7 to 8 or around that number per year.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a legacy player, like you said, a great leader that he's not done, right? He's not Randy Moss at 35, he's definitely not done, right? Yeah. Like we're not just holding on here. He's a 1,000-yard rusher, double-digit touchdown scorer.
And in an offense that would not ask him to carry a heavy load, that would provide a lot of room to run, like, say, the Baltimore Ravens offense, who he's already being linked in rumors that the Ravens would be a perfect match for Henry as Henry chases a ring at the end of his career, and the Ravens look to upgrade a room that's been devastated by injury, what feels like every season for the last 5 years. I don't know. Feels like the Ravens running backs are just constantly getting hurt. Bring in a stabilizer like Derrick Henry. I could see a team like the Ravens offering more than the Titans would be willing to. And I know I just mentioned that $4.7 million dead cap hit as being a sunk cost that you can't really, put too much stock into in terms of when you're making these moves. But as the Titans, you may view that as money committed to running backs already and try to say, can we survive a season with Tajay Spears and Julius Chestnut? Can we spend a late round draft pick on a running back or bring in an undrafted free agent guy? Or are we going to be able to sit around and wait until May and pay a guy like Zach Moss or AJ Dillon $2 million a year, and then our running back room is a bit higher because of that $4.7 million dead cap? As opposed to saying, yeah, we can pay $8 million a year to Derrick Henry, and we have that $4.7 million dead cap already on the books. So it's like we're paying $12 million.
Yeah, but that's a cap charge, right? Like if they pay him $8 million, the cap charge in 2024 is not going to be $8 million, right?
Unless it's a 1 year.
Lower that. Unless it's a 1
Unless it's a 1 year deal. unless it's a 1-year deal, and
True.
I would be surprised if they sign Henry to another 1-year deal with more void. They're not going to tack on more void years. They're dealing with the results of those void years right now, so they're not going to put more on the plate. Maybe if you sign him to a 2-year deal, you lower the first year cap hit. You don't make it a very you lower the guarantees in the contract, so the second year cap hit is high. But if you cut him, you don't have a lot of dead money. Like, I could totally see a scenario like that. And that's, if I was in charge of the Titans, that's what I would do. I would think I would offer like 2-year, $15 million contract, but only like $5 or $6 million guaranteed, laden that thing heavy with incentives, so that if Henry is super productive, he gets the money that he feels he deserves. If the age catches up to him, if he gets injured again like he did a couple seasons ago and the production's not there, you don't have to pay as much. The cap charge stays low. That's where I would be at if I was in charge of the Titans, because I definitely think there's a place for him on the Tennessee roster to be more of a complement to Tajay Spears as opposed to the other way around like it was this past season, and bring back a guy that the city loves, the team loves, his teammates love him. Still obviously one of the hardest working guys. We've already seen the crazy workout videos being posted this offseason where he's like doing lat pulls, but he's on his side and he's like pinned up on one elbow and one leg and he's pulling with the other arm. Like, he's doing crazy workouts already. I just don't think a 1-year deal where your cap charge is going to be high. And I don't know. I struggle to think that the Titans would want to pay a ton of money to this position when, based on everything we know about Brian Callahan, they're going to run the ball to be efficient. They're going to run the ball when they need to, but they're not going to put a heavy emphasis on, we need to run the ball, we need to be successful here. I think that Brian Callahan believes the scheme and the offensive line, with hopefully Bill Callahan coaching up a lot of players, is going to open holes no matter who the running back is. And we sort of saw in Cincinnati last year, Joe Mixon had another, good to above average to good season. But then Chase Brown, a rookie, came in and made explosive plays in the same system because there's just room to run when you open up the field with the passing game on early downs. So anyway, all that to say, as a fan of the team, as someone who has loved every moment of Derrick Henry's career, it would be awesome if the team can find a way to bring him back. Realistically, I don't know if that's going to happen, and I would temper expectations a lot. I think a lot of Titans fans have sort of accepted that the Henry era is over and would be ecstatic if they found a way to bring him back. If I had to predict right now, I think Henry explores the market. I think there's going to be time before he signs. Like, this could be one of those, like, he's a veteran superstar, late June type of signings where he just waits for the right fit and the right offer. Just that kind of guy who's doing his own workouts. He doesn't have to worry about OTAs and off-season training and all that. He's going to keep his body in peak physical form. We already know that. So he doesn't need to be at those team off-season workouts. Sign a contract. I don't think that's going to happen in late June.
I'll be honest with you. I think he gets scooped up rather quickly.
Okay.
And I'll make a bold prediction. Well, not bold. I'll make my prediction. I don't think it's by the Titans. And I'm with you. I don't hate the 2-year, $15 million proposed contract. I was thinking along the same lines. I think he could have success here still. I think there's a role for him, even if it's, you said a compliment to Tajay Spears. I don't know about that, but I think 50-50 was something more that I could see. But I also think that's all probably the fan in me. Yeah. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's leaving. I think he's gone. I think he gets scooped up by a contender. I think the Ravens obviously make a lot of sense. If they can afford it, I wouldn't be stunned if the Dallas Cowboys made a play for him. I think they got to be a bit more effective running the football, take a little off Dak Prescott's plate. They got a lot of extensions to give out. Dak, CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons. So I don't know if they can afford it. But like you said, if it's a 2-year deal, you keep the cap hit pretty low in year one. I wouldn't be shocked if Jerry made a run at him. I don't think it's going to be in Tennessee. And I think there are a couple of outcomes the Titans could have at running back. I've talked a lot about Gus Edwards. I would be a huge fan of that signing. I think that's the best thing they could do. But I think a guy, as we already said, a Zach Moss, a Devin Singletary can also be a nice compliment to Tajay Spears if they're heading into the draft. I don't love them spending a pick on a running back because they spent one last year and they don't have a lot of draft capital as is. But fits on day 3, a guy like Braylon Allen from Wisconsin is a big-bodied guy that I think makes a lot of sense. Like, I've seen some people talk about guys that are like Tajay Spears You don't want to pair Tajay Spears with another Tajay Spears. That doesn't make any damn sense to me. It's going to have to be a bigger bodied guy that can maybe have a bit more success early downs between the tackles. So they'll have options, but I don't think it's going to be Derrick Henry.
The Titans have 3 7th-round picks, and at that point in the draft,
you're not getting Braylon Allen there, I don't think.
No, but I mean, at that point, you could package 2 of those to move back up into the 6th, or package a 6th and a 7th to come up into the 5th, or take somebody who's not Braylon Allen, that's just a college running back in the 7th round, instead
Ray
of
Davis
waiting.
from Kentucky's a really intriguing one for me.
I like him a lot. I mean, obviously, my parents both went to Kentucky, so I'm very familiar with that program. But yeah, I like him a lot. I think one other thing that should be factored into this conversation that we probably should have mentioned more at the top, but whatever, I'll bring it up now. There's been rumors over the last week or so that the salary cap is going to be higher than initially projected.
Quite a bit too, right? Yeah.
What?
Quite a bit higher, right? Like 6 or 7 million higher.
Yeah, I mean, like a full contract, like a fairly big contract higher. So originally sources were saying that they were expecting the salary cap to be between 242 and 243 million. And for reference, if you go to Spotrac right now and look at how available cap space, they're using 242 million. They're using 242.5 million. Over the cap is currently using 242 million as their projected cap number. Mike Florio reported recently that he's hearing 250 could be the number. Like you just said, $7 million higher, $8 million higher.
There's your 1 year, $7 million contract for Derrick Henry, right?
So if the cap does come in higher, and let's say the Titans have already done all their math on how much they can afford to spend at each position here, and then they end up with an extra $7 million that they didn't know they were going to have, maybe the conversation changes a little bit. The same thing goes for every other team, though. I look at a team like Kansas City, who just won the Super Bowl. Obviously, they're very happy with Isaiah Pacheco, but it seems they're very not happy with the other backs they have. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a free agent. Jerick McKinnon way up there in age. Would they be a team that's like, oh, we have an extra $7 million we didn't know we were going to have?
I don't know.
Maybe they go after
Chris
Derrick
Jones,
Henry.
L'Jarius Sneed.
They do have
that's where they're thinking first.
They definitely have some big players that they need to retain. They have a huge need at wide receiver, but they could also try to address that in the draft. I'm just thinking contenders that Henry might be interested in. Henry might be interested in signing a cheap ass contract to go win a Super Bowl with, the team that's almost been there 6 years in a row, or been to however many AFC championship games in a row, and just won 2 Super Bowls in a row. Like, I'm just saying I could see it. I could also see a team like the Eagles. DeAndre Swift's a free agent. AJ Brown's already there. He obviously has a great relationship with him. Kevin Byard may or may not be there if they cut him or what. But
maybe Derrick Henry wants to feel like a winner, though. You're right. Maybe he goes to Philadelphia.
Yeah, things are done differently here. So those are some of the teams that I would be on the lookout for. Obviously, we mentioned the Ravens. Like, they do seem like probably the favorite to sign him just when it comes to need, ability to compete. I could also see, I know James Cook had a great season with the Bills, but had some moments that weren't so great, and the Bills are always trying to upgrade and become contenders too. Who knows where he'll end up, but I definitely think, if I'm being totally honest with myself, I don't think it's going to be in Nashville. Let's talk about Denico Autry, a guy who I kind of feel the same way about, to be honest. I think he'd be a great piece to bring back, mentor some of the younger guys, even though there really aren't that many younger guys on the D-line. But if they drafted somebody or signed somebody younger, have Denico Autry there to help transition over the next couple seasons. He's another guy that's getting pretty high up there in age. He's going to be 34 around the time the season is starting this next season. So 34 years old. Now, this is a position, this defensive end, defensive line, tweener guy. That's a position that sometimes pass rushers can play at a high level till they're 38, 39. We saw Cameron Wake obviously dealt with a lot of injuries, but was, when he was still on the field, very productive at a very high age. So I do think Denico Autry,
Houston is still going, and he's had some pretty good years lately.
So I think, he could definitely still be a productive guy, especially if you put him in more of a pass rusher only role so he can stay fresh throughout a game and come in and make impact plays. He's obviously been one of the Titans' best defenders and most consistent defenders since he signed his 3-year, $21.5 million contract with Tennessee. That was 3 years ago now, obviously, which is why we're having this conversation.
What a deal. I'm sorry. We're not allowed to ever praise John Robinson. That contract is on the Mount Rushmore of Titans contracts and free agency signings. Mount Rushmore. Free agency, Mount Rushmore, Delanie Walker, Denico Autry, Nate Washington, that's what we're talking about. What an unbelievable 30 sacks in 3 years they got in that
Brian
deal.
Orakpo for 4th spot on your Mount Rushmore?
I don't know. Didn't he disappoint in the first year, if I recall correctly? Like I think it took Arakpo a little while to get going, and they paid him well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they
but
did.
30 sacks in 3 years for
I know.
$7 million a year. That is a bargain, man. That's what mid-tier pass rushers get in free agency. Okay, if you're not familiar, that's what they gave Arden Key last offseason, and I like that deal. But that's what you're supposed to give rotational, effective pass rushers like Arden Key. They got 30 sacks, man, on that deal. I cannot believe he was as a career high 11 and a half sacks this past year. He is an alien. I'm sorry. You cannot talk about him like you can 99% of other NFL players when it comes to age and contract, because I don't know. It's like you'd be foolish. You know it's going to catch up to him at some point. But I'm almost in gotta see it to believe it territory, man. I gotta see him slow down to believe that he's going to. And I think people aren't talking about enough. If they let him go, I mean, this roster is already so barren of talent, in all honesty. Like, what a major need you have at edge if he's not back. Like, you've got Harold Landry and Arden Key. You've got nothing else, man. And Arden Key's, as we said, I think better suited as a rotational guy. Not going to give you 80, 90% of snaps in a single game, and certainly not throughout the course of a season, right? So you're going to need a guy to do a little heavy lifting. And maybe what you said, maybe you're worried that that's not Denico Autry at this point. But again, I mean, he did it this year. I got to see it. I cannot believe he had 11 and a half career high. I can't believe I didn't realize he hadn't hit double digits yet in Tennessee. He's always been around there and flirted with it. Finally does it this year, man. Like, the guy's just a freak. He is completely drinking. He's had a cup from the fountain of youth, right? Or more than one. I think you watched him play this past year. It's crazy.
And he's only missed 5 games in the 3 years he's been with Tennessee.
And they were consecutive, weren't they?
All 5 of those
he got hurt in that Green Bay game, right?
Yeah, all 5 of those came in the 2022 season towards the end of the year when the Titans were, on a 7-game losing streak and not competing for the playoffs by the end of it. To
be fair, let's be honest. I want to say that happened in the Green Bay game. He got hurt, and they went to 7-3 in that game. So I want to say his injury coincided with that losing streak.
Yeah, true. That actually is probably a better way to look at it. And to be totally upfront, he had 28 and a half sacks in 3 years. Not 30, but whatever.
I knew it was close. I couldn't do the mental. I'm bad at math. I was looking at that. I'm like 11 and an 8.5, 8, 9, 30 sacks. It's got to be 30, right? I couldn't do the mental math quick enough to sound sharp on here still.
So talking about what kind of contract Autry would be looking at here. Now, Spotrac, if you go to the market value tab for these players, tells you what, their calculated market value is. Denico Autry doesn't have one. There's no calculated market value.
And honestly, I love it, but it's not always super accurate either.
Yeah.
Like it's hit and miss depending on the player based on my history.
But there are other places that have projected out what a Denico Autry 2024 contract could look like. The website Yardbarker has him projected for 1 year, $9 million with $6 million of that guaranteed. Over the Cap has his valuation, which is based on production and age, at $10.5 million per year, which is obviously, the Titans were paying $7 2/3 million a year. Huge value that they got for him over his time. If Over the Cap has him valued at $10.5 million per year. Now, with his age, I don't know if he's going to get $10.5 million a year, but the elite of the elite pass rushers are making $28 million a year these days. So maybe it's not impossible to think that he could get 12, 13 from a contender who could use him in a rotational pass rusher role and really keep him fresh and take advantage of that. That's what the market says. I don't know if you agree with that, but
you know what we don't talk about enough when it comes to these things, not just you and I, but everyone in general. And I feel so smart for right now for just thinking of this on the spot as a point to bring up. Okay. I think you see it more in the NHL. I'm a hockey guy as well, but it's not always, age, what you made on your last contract. At least in the NHL, it's very often percentage of cap. Okay. What did I make last time? Well, I was only making 13% of our cap. I'm our best player. Well, now I want to make 15% of our cap, right? And I'm not saying it's going to be the same, but the reason I bring up that point, do you know what the NFL salary cap was when the Titans signed Denico Autry to the 3-year contract at average $7 million a year? Just take a wild guess. I have it in front of me.
190?
182 and a half. It was 182. If you're talking 250, it's almost gone up $100 million, right? Or 70, 75. I'm being a little facetious. 70, 75 million since he last signed that deal, okay? And he's been super productive. I'm going to put my hands up again. I'm not bad at contract stuff. I'm pretty good. I write a lot of it for the Draft Network, where like my boss will ask me, write an article on what the Montez, look up my Montez Sweat article, what that extension was going to be. I almost hit the nail on the head. Okay, I'm pretty good at these things. I'm okay. I'm not like a F word spot. He's a cap guru, but I'm pretty good at, if you put in enough research, you look at market value, you look at what other guys signed recently, you can usually come to a pretty good conclusion. I have a hard time with Denico Autry. I get it, right? Like no doubt he outperformed that contract he should have been making $15 million a year based on what he produced, in all honesty, right? At least $15 million a year based on what he produced. How does age play a role now? Who has a career best year at 33 years old?
Yeah.
Seriously, when the hell was the last time that happened? I would love to know. A career best year at 30 at any position. Maybe Tom Brady at quarterback, he kind of took off after like 8 or 9 years, got even better, but career best year at 33? Like, it's unheard of, man. And he's a freak. He does not look like he's lost a step at all. I have a hard time knowing. I think obviously it's going to be short because of the age. But I wouldn't, like, everyone's going to project 1 year. I wouldn't be stunned if someone goes 2 or max 3 if that third year doesn't have much guarantees.
Right. I was going to just say, if we talk about what would you offer if you're in charge of the Titans cap roll?
It's hard.
I think I would offer something like what he signed with Tennessee last year and maybe take the guarantees down a little bit so that, like you said, if by the time that third season is approaching and we're in this time 3 years from now, and we're thinking, well, he didn't have it as much toward the end of the year, and he's got a sizable cap hit coming up, and he's going to be 37, then maybe you get out of that last year before it has a huge hit. I would say 3 years, 19, 20 million, maybe 21 if you're feeling frisky and it's not high guarantees. Like, that wouldn't be a crazy contract to me for a guy.
It's not crazy. I think I'd go 2, though. I think I'd go like 2. And close to your number still, because I rate 216.5, 2.7, even 2.8. I'd probably max out at 2.18. I'd say $9 million a year, and most of it's front loaded. You got a ton of cap space this year, right? So you let him eat 7-8 million this year, or whatever, 6 to 8 million this year. That second year, you've got some wiggle room where if you have to cut bait, maybe it only costs you. I know it's not a void year thing, but maybe it costs you the Derrick Henry thing. It costs you 3-4 million if you got to move on in year 2 if he's not as effective, but. I think I'd be willing to go 2 years.
I think if we look around the league at like who's going to be competing for his services, some teams that jump out to me as potential teams are like the Bengals, who have a ton of cap space themselves, trying to get over that hump.
But that doesn't factor in the T. Higgins money yet, I don't think.
Of course. I mean, they're going to have to,
and
franchise
if they tag
T. Higgins.
they're all goes because that's fully guaranteed and you can't lower it, right?
Right, but they have, I'm talking upwards of 60 million, and that's with the 242 million projected cap hit. Like, they have a fifth most cap space in the league right now, projected according to Spotrac. And again, if it's a $250 million salary cap instead of 242, that's 8 more million that they would have there. So, and they're already at, according to Spotrac, 61 million now. Sure, you take 25 million off or so, 22, 25 for T. Higgins. You're still looking at 40 something, million dollars in cap space that they could afford 6 million to Autry. The Houston Texans are a team that have a ton of cap space that could use another pass rusher.
That would hurt. I don't want to see that.
I would hate that. The Detroit Lions have 52 million in cap space.
That's a great fit. Terrell Williams is the D-line coach.
Exactly.
And they really need a guy opposite Aiden
Hutchinson. And they have some guys that have been productive in spurts, like the rookie, the guy who was a second-year player this year, rookie last year, who had one of the best.
He was hurt all year this year, unfortunately.
Yep. And they're a team that signed Romeo Okwara a few years ago when Titans fans were
bunch of those guys, Charles Harris and the other Okwara brother, Julian Okwara. None of them have really done, at least this past year, what they thought they were going to do. So it's time they move on probably from all 3 of those guys and find something.
With the Terrell Williams connection, I could totally see a fit in Detroit.
Yeah, you might have just found it, man. That's a great
So that probably scares me as the teams with the biggest competition for him. Again, I would absolutely love for the Titans to re-sign Denico Autry. But when you talk about the timelines, when that comes into play, sure, Denico Autry makes them a much better team in 2024. But looking at the state of the roster.
Breaking news.
Uh-oh. We don't
Not
do this
Titans
often.
breaking news, but it's really, wow. The NFL just announced that the 2024 salary cap
oh my God, what
will
timing?
be 255.4.
Holy shit.
255.4.
This is crazy. I can't believe we're taping a podcast and we've been talking about this for the last 40 minutes and this is happening right now. What timing?
That is 13 million higher than the 242.
Wow.
Bring them all back. Bring Derrick Henry. Bring Tina. Bring them all back. Bring Ryan Tannehill back. Jesus Christ.
The crazy thing about this is like every team gets the same giant boost of over what they were expecting. So like the teams that this most affects are like the Saints and the Bills
Titans,
and the Dolphins.
But it helps the Titans too.
Who are 50 million over the cap. Of course it helps the Titans. I mean, that would give the Titans a projected $85 million in cap space, according to Spotrac. Wow, that is pretty cool news to get right now. I mean, with that in mind, the Titans should bring back Denico Autry. What I was going to say is it makes them an absolutely better team in 2024, but how long is Autry going to keep up this level of play? Does it hamstring them in 2025 and 2026, or does it cause them to not look at getting younger at the position because they have Autry in that role? Or if they do get younger at the position, does it cause that player to have a slower development timeline because he's not playing as much because you have Denico Autry? So those are the things that you have to weigh. How competitive are the Titans going to be this season when you look at this roster and how much turnover is needed? Like, it feels like 2024 is a transition year as they build up to something great. And then 2025, you infuse a little bit more talent, and then you're ready to make a run. That's kind of how I see the Titans' timeline right now, especially when you look at what Brian Callahan went through in Cincinnati. He went through a couple of really bad years. Obviously, one of those years got them Joe Burrow. You can eliminate that year from the Titans' timeline because they already have, hopefully, their quarterback in Will Levis. But even Joe Burrow's first full season, obviously he got injured, so there was that to deal with, but the Bengals didn't have the best year, and that's how they ended up getting Jamar Chase. Remember, they had the 5th overall pick. So I kind of see a season like that playing out, even looking at some of the faster rebuilds, like the Lions had to go through a really bad year, and then a year where they almost made the playoffs, and then they had last season. That's kind of what happens in the NFL. The Texans were sort of an anomaly. They got, they hit big on C.J. Stroud, Will Anderson, Tank Dell. So they were able to do that in 1 year and make the playoffs. But even then, I guess they won a playoff game, but they weren't uber competitive in their second playoff game. So anyway, all that to say, I don't know if Denico Autry's timeline is going to line up with the Titans, if it's going to be worth it to them to invest resources and playing time into a guy who's going to be 34 this season. That's where I'm at. I would love him back as a fan, and I feel like he still has 1 or 2 productive years left in him. But again, does that match up with what the Titans are going to be over the next 1 to 2 years?
Well, and there's a scenario I guess we haven't acknowledged where they could sign someone in free agency to play his role, right? A much younger guy. One guy that I think would certainly intrigue me is Bryce Huff of the New York Jets, right? He's scheduled to hit free agency. Totally. They have spent a lot of draft capital on that position, right? The 2 first-round picks back-to-back, right? Jermaine Johnson and then the Iowa State kid. It just escaped me. Yeah, you'll know who he is because he played in your Will McDonald, I think it was. So back-to-back first-round picks on pass rushers. He had 10 sacks this year. What a breakout year for him. I mean, that might be a bad thing, right? He's hitting the market at he never had more than 3.5 sacks before this year, and he had 10 this year. But he's hitting the market all-time high, right, in terms of his asking price. And I believe he's got some familiarity, right? He's been there since 2020 with the Jets. Was Denard Wilson there in 2020 with the Jets? He was the pass game coordinator and DB coach in 2020. So Denard Wilson. So that means what? I think Frank Bush was there as well. Steve Jackson was there as well in 2020. So a lot of familiarity between Bryce Huff as an unrestricted free agent, and he's a big guy, good defensive end. So it wouldn't shock me if they went that route. If you talked about getting younger, if they wanted to get younger, they could address it in free agency. But I certainly think at some point, he played at Memphis, by the way, college ball, so played somewhat locally. Bryce Huff went undrafted. What a 6'3", 255 he was listed coming out. What a success story he's been. That's a guy that I think could be on their radar if they want to get younger.
I like that as a potential younger option too. And this is a position that Titans fans don't want them to draft because the need at wide receiver, offensive line, and even cornerback all outweigh the need for a younger, effective pass rusher. But I mean, 4th round, 5th round, developmental type of guy. There's a few guys in this class that we talked about before the Senior Bowl that, maybe a little reminiscent of Max Crosby style guys who went middle of the draft and not first round picks. they could go that direction too. I don't want to rule it out. I don't think it's necessarily likely because they need to invest in a lot of offensive positions, but wouldn't rule it out for sure. But yeah, I think ultimately, if you had to predict right now, will either Derrick Henry or Denico Autry be Titans in 2024? What would you say?
I'll leave you with this, and we're going to get out of here. We're running long. I think Denico Autry's got a way better chance, I think, than Derrick Henry does. And I don't see a universe where both return. I see a 50-50 universe where 1 or 0 return, right? I think that's the likeliest outcome, and I think Autry's got a better shot.
I do too. I think if I had to put money on some outcome occurring, it would be that neither of them return to Tennessee. If I had to put my heart on it, what I want to happen, I would want both of them back. I just don't know if either of them makes sense from a age financial standpoint, and that's ultimately, it's a business. That's what it comes down to. It'd be great to bring Derrick Henry back, almost just to say, come retire a Titan, and maybe
come beat Eddie George's record. He's like 500 yards away
exactly,
from being the all-time leader.
And maybe 2-3 years down the road, he'll sign a one-day contract and retire a Titan.
I think that happens no matter what.
But it's probably not going to be because he played his whole career in one city. I mean, even the best running backs of all time, most of them, look at the Eddie Georges, the Emmitt Smiths.
Most
even
of the best players. I can't believe
Chris Johnson.
I would have bet my house that Peyton Manning and Tom Brady played their whole career in Indianapolis and New England. I would have bet the house.
And you would be homeless, my friend.
I would. We wouldn't be able to do this pod. I got nowhere to plug anything in.
All right, that's going to do it for this show. And remember, let us know in the comments. Would you re-sign Derrick Henry, Denico Autry? What's too much money to pay them? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Make sure you're subscribed to the Music City Audible channel on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for sticking with us for the whole episode. A little bit of a look ahead here. Let's talk about what's coming up on the schedule. So the rest of this week and next week. So we're recording this on a Friday. Full disclosure. Not sure when this is going to get posted. Probably today. Maybe not. We'll see. If it does get posted on Friday, next week, we're going to drop a couple of episodes looking at the rest of the Titans' pending free agents. We're going to go through one episode. We're going to go through all the guys on offense that are set to be free agents. Another one, all the guys on defense that are set to be free agents, and go through one by one. Should the Titans re-sign them? If so, what would their contract look like? Some of those conversations will be a lot shorter than others. Most of them will probably not be too long because there aren't a huge number of super impactful free agents. Even though the Titans have a lot of guys set to hit the market, this team is bad. So a lot of those guys are not necessarily good. So that's next week. The Combine starts next week. Officially sort of starts on Monday and Tuesday. The coaches and GMs will be speaking to media.
Thursday, though.
Tuesday and Wednesday. The on-field workouts start Thursday, and the on-field workouts that people care about start Friday with tight ends and linebackers, and then the real stuff is Saturday with quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers. That's the day that most people will be tuned into. So I think, Justin, the way we're going to hit the Combine is maybe we'll drop a preview episode next week, although I think we're going to be focused on these pending free agents. To me, we should just look at after the Combine. Stock up, stock down, who made themselves money, who are names that we need to remember coming out of the Combine, as opposed to names to watch going into the Combine, which I think is a little less useful and certainly will have more longer term relevance versus taping a pod one day before the Combine telling you who to watch and then you go watch it. Like, let's react to the Combine after the Combine. And then after the Combine is basically free agency. The franchise tag deadline, March 5th, is coming up. Once that deadline passes, we'll be able to look at who the best free agent options are for the Titans, and we're going to have a whole episode breaking down guys like that at every position that the Tennessee Titans could possibly target. So that's 2 weeks away. Next week, we're looking at pending free agents. 3 weeks away is actually free agency. It's all happening. It's coming up quickly. And then after free agency, we will be in hardcore draft mode for the Titans on this channel. So make sure you're subscribed, like I said. Make sure you're following Justin on Twitter at JustinM_NFL. You can follow me at Titans Film Room. We'll be back with more soon. Until then, y'all stay safe out there and tighten up.
A Broadway sports media production.